Welcome back to Most Buffalo. Earlier this year, I was invited to a meeting with a man named Paul. He's a butler, my boss said. A butler? I said, a butler. He confirmed. He's British and everything. I was immediately intrigued, and I had an image in my head of what that meant. And I wasn't far off, but I also quickly learned there was much more to Paul the butler. One thing I knew for sure is that I wanted to share his story.
Hello, Kate. How are you? Welcome, welcome.
Thank you. May I present Mr. Paul Smith?
Somebody asked me what my career was like. And I said, well, when it was sort of at its peak, it was kind of like The Devil Wears Prada and The Nanny Diaries.
Boy, does he have stories.
I worked briefly for a Arab prince in London, and that was a very interesting job. I was only there briefly to fill in for the butler who was in hospital. They didn't tell me he was having a nervous breakdown.
Little flickers of a life most of us have only ever seen glimpses of on television. Paul is a real-life English butler, the real deal, professionally trained, Downton Abbey and East Aurora by way of Yorkshire. He's been at the beck and call of some of the world's wealthiest families, but his upbringing was anything but gilded.
And growing up, I was in the orphanage, fostered, adopted, back to the orphanage. The adoption didn't work.
But he eventually found his way, landing a respectable job in a historic inn, but he wanted more. And then a friend made a suggestion that would change his life.
And she plopped these papers on the table. And I said, what the heck is this? She said, it's a butler school. And I think it's for you.
Off he went, learning the ins and outs of proper service, the art of running households, fetching tea, arranging flowers, and that was just the beginning.
And as long as it's not something illegal, you would do what your employer asks you to do.
Then life served Mr. Paul Smith a new adventure.
My agent Ivor called me and said, you want to go to America, right? And I said, well, eventually after Australia and, Italy maybe. Or he said, well, Buffalo will call you. Take the call.
28 years ago this December, Mr. Smith touched down in western New York, where he stayed for a decade or so before moving again. Virginia, West Virginia, North Carolina, dinner party after dinner party, year after year.
It's difficult in some ways because you don't always feel grounded. And if you have friends who call and say, hey, would you like to go and see James Bond? Yes, I can do it on Wednesday, it's my day off. And then your employer calls you and says, oh, Auntie Mary is having the bishop to lunch and we'd like to have him for dinner, so can you work? We'd expect that you could work. I woke up at 55 and I said, I just don't have a life. I just felt I didn't have a life. And I felt not really ostracized, but I did feel this life had taken hold of me and that people didn't care about me the way I cared about them in that sense. I mean, I'd worked for people for 8 years and they didn't know when my birthday was.
So Mr. Smith, ready for a new chapter, called on some old friends.
And when they picked me up and we hopped on the 400 to get here to East Aurora, it was as though somebody had poured warm water over me. It was an odd sensation. It actually stopped me in mid-sentence, which, if anybody knows me, that's hard to do. So I stopped and I arrested myself and I thought, gosh, I wonder if that's how it feels to go home.
Home. It was a place Paul the butler had never really known. After years of anticipating the every need of other people, he was ready to find some balance and really live his own life. So now he is, as Paul, the charming neighbor with the endearing accent who loves gardening and animals and cooking and has a delightful, sometimes wicked sense of humor. And oh yes, He'll absolutely help you throw the best party in town because, after all, he is a professionally trained, real-life English butler.
I'm here to hopefully start a new life for myself and make some new friends and go from there.
Mr. Paul Smith, at your service. And we are so grateful to Paul for opening up his home and his life to us. And now that you know a little bit more about him, we're excited to tell you that he's going to be with us for the next couple of days. You saw a little preview of what we'll get up to in that piece. Join us tomorrow and Wednesday as we hang out with Paul and he teaches us some of the trade secrets to make any holiday or even life in general a little extra special. That's going to be tomorrow and Wednesday here on Most Buffalo. He's got a lot of tricks up his sleeve.
You know,
he's a hoot.
I want to say to him, welcome home.
Yes.
Good to have you. Yeah, enjoy your life.